that people can't be declared uninsurable.
Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Mr. Keith Caldwell, and he's giving us some information in reference to faith and community. And of course, Mr. Caldwell, I think before we had our first commercial break, we promised that we'd give you an opportunity to talk about health care in the state of Tennessee. Not necessarily to talk about any specific program, but what are some of the needs that you've seen in terms of the travel that you've done in the state and et cetera, of people who need health, and not only health, or any other kind of social kind of situation that you've had to deal with as a community organizer?
Yeah, so in traveling across the state, we know Tennessee is one of the economically poorest states in the Union. And going up in Appalachia and all the way to Memphis, we see people need health care. And actually, Tennessee, we need to sign off on the Affordable Health Care Act. It's also called Obamacare, which we know that that's part of the resistance to signing off on it. And we really need to get the political will so that Governor Haslam will sign off on this. We know that nationally, this bill actually allows 30 to 40 million people who previously were considered, who didn't have insurance. It doesn't allow for insurance companies to cherry pick people and to say you're uninsurable, and those kind of safeguards so that we can have, and that the net gain of that financially would be increased. But there's also a moral obligation that we have as a state to look after our residents, and we just need to create the political will to bring the pressure to bear on Governor Haslam to sign off on this.
And so not only do we have some issues dealing with health in the state of Tennessee, there are other issues, issues of incarceration. I would imagine that you've been involved with those, and at least you are aware as a community organizer the impact that it has on families and etc. Let's talk about from some of the things from that perspective as a community organizer.
I would recommend folks to read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. It's a phenomenal book that breaks apart this prison industrial complex and this sentencing, even around nonviolent offenses. We're talking about a lot of folks who have marijuana convictions, and we know in some states marijuana is legal, and so we see the disparity, and we see the numbers that roughly 13% of all the population uses drugs, black, white, Latino, and then we see how that increases when it comes to sentencing, and then how it increases when it goes to time served exponentially with black and brown people receiving harsher sentences, more time, and disproportionate contact. So we want to work on that as another issue. I think about Nashville, and we say that this civil rights movement, that this was a seat of power, of resistance. And I was trained by the Reverend Jim Lawson, and there's still folks like Brother Matthew Walker Jr., who just passed away, Brother Kwame Lillard, Diane Nash, just phenomenal people who, when we look at the civil rights movement, that Dr. King actually came to Fisk and said, I didn't come to Nashville to bring inspiration, rather to gain inspiration, because this was one of the most organized cities. And we look at the factors that made Nashville this way. We think about Tennessee being touched by 8 other states, Nashville being the buckle of the Bible Belt, and also called the Protestant Vatican, because we have the headquarters for Baptists and Methodists, and all these mainline denominations are located here in Nashville. But more than that, Dr. Haney, their publishing comes out of here. And so religious publishing and the impact, you can't hardly go to a hotel room in the world and open up a Gideon Bible and see Nashville, formerly Thomas Nelson, Methodist Publishing House, Baptist Publishing House, and the images that they put in the Sunday school material. And so they decide what Moses looks like, what Miriam looks like, and we see that was an entire movement around icons and iconoclasm to pull these images down because of theologically what they reproduce, particularly around images that support white supremacy. And when I say white supremacy, people cringe, and we want to talk about white supremacy not as a deconstructing white people, but deconstructing the brutal 500-year legacy of slavery that continues to show up in unjust systems and structures and institutions like the prison industrial complex that criminalizes black and brown embodied people and poor white people at disproportionate levels.
Very good. And so in a real sense, as a community organizer, it means that you're working in various communities around the city. Why don't you?
Around the state.
Around the state.
Yeah, and so to continue with about this interpreting community. So there's several interpreting communities, right? So we saw in 1960 when Vanderbilt kicked Jim Lawson out for organizing the sit-ins, right? Then there was an interpretive community with American Baptist College, Fisk, Meharry, and Tennessee State University that interpreted scripture very differently, right? And so these are two interpretive communities in the same city, right? And it depends where we are seated, determines where we stand in a lot of issues. So we see these interpretive communities even today, and how do we create a narrative if we are in faith that reclaims, particularly the Christian faith, the life and ministry of Jesus. And we think about that. A lot of theologians call the birth of Jesus the scandal of particularity, to have been conceived by a teenage, unwed, colonized Jew for a mother. We see that in Luke too. So, and to say, how could this person come, and we expect from power, from the empire, and come from the underside and invert every power structure that there is, even 2,000 years later. So we want to reclaim that narrative, because people who are oppressed can identify with the Jesus that comes from Nazareth. Can any good thing come from Nazareth? Because it was such a ghetto. And to say it's no matter where one is born or where they started out in life, that we want to create the opportunities that they can rise to the heights of their abilities. And if that means addressing, we call it social sin, unjust systems, because we want to limit this idea of sin to personal piety, right? But I'm Methodist, so we believe in the outworking of that through this understanding, this social holiness, right? And this holiness shows up in how we live in community together and who is my neighbor. So my work is deeply inspired by my faith.
And so what we'll do, Mr. Caldwell, is to take this final commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll have about 10 minutes, and that will give you an opportunity to bring in additional information that you'd like to deal with, as well as to appeal to whatever people you would like to appeal to this morning in reference to what you're doing. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. About individuals,
and former felons. Talk about gentrification, man. Homeless housing, affordable housing.
You can see that all around, and you can see that all around.